Welcome to the Bloomberg Equality Summit. We are live right now, right here today, talking about diversity, talking about inclusion. Of course, we talk a lot about that. We know the rhetoric, but we really want to get to the action behind that rhetoric and get right down to it with our panel. I'm Romaine Bostick, anchor here on Bloomberg Television. Today, I'm joined by three wonderful, wonderful guests. Marianne Harrison, President and CEO of John Hancock, joining us today. Kevin Lobo, Chair and CEO of Stryker. And Tim Ryan, U.S. Chair and Senior Partner over at PwC. He's also the co-founder of CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. And Tim, I'll start with you there. And the creation of this group of CEO Action, the origins of it, and more specifically, Tim, what's your goal?
Yeah, thanks, Romaine. It's great to be with Marianne and Kevin. Everybody, thank you for joining for this important topic. CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion is now a group of over 2,000 CEOs that represent over 20 million employees across the country. The goal is to drive diversity and inclusion better, faster, more efficiently, and getting to better answers around diversity and inclusion inside the four walls of corporate America. Our goal number one is to make the workplaces safe, to have true, real important discussions on diversity and inclusion, on race, on ethnicity, on how people really feel. And that was a goal 4 years ago, and it's more important now than it's ever been. It's also really important and a big goal to share best practices because we don't need to keep recreating the wheel over and over again. And on the website, ceoaction.com, there's now over 600 best practices where you can go to a company, get the name of the person, and contact them to learn quickly and accelerate our learning curve. And then also the goal is to get every company to put together an annual Dni inclusion strategy plan where you go through every aspect of Dni, recruiting, retention, development, board representation, and everything in between. So we're now 4 years old, significant momentum, and we're learning from each other.
And with regards to some of those points that you rattled off with regards to creating that Dni strategy, is there sort of a ranking and importance of those things, or is this more sort of, I guess, an amalgamation of all those things into one sort of final goal?
Yeah, so Romaine, the ultimate goal here is to have corporate America look like America and make sure that we are at true representation and true inclusion. They're all important, but if I were to cite one biggest thing, what I'm proud about CEO Action is you've got over 2,000 CEOs who've come together and said it starts with me. When we started CEO Action 4 years ago, we chose a name very deliberately, CEO and Action. And as we all know, it starts at the top with people like Kevin, Marianne, and myself leading from the top. So the single biggest secret to success is the CEO, whether it's a he or she, driving it from the top and making sure it happens.
All right. Well, then, Kevin, I'll go to you next year then and talk about how you integrate those types of strategies into a company, specifically maybe when your company doesn't have necessarily, I guess, the what you would consider to be sort of the general ethos of what people look for. I mean, it's a medical device company, it's a surgical device company. Some people will look at it and say, why does Stryker really need to pay more attention to something like diversity and inclusion? Why?
Well, to me, it's very simple. The most diverse and inclusive teams are the highest performing teams. And so I've been CEO 8 years at Stryker, and I put DE&I as one of the major platforms when I launched this, my whole initiatives for the 8 years. So it was an integral part of our strategy right from the beginning. So all of the flare-ups that occurred last year in the United States, really, for us, it was just a continuation of the programs we'd already been starting. And we've really made big improvements. Our board is now 50% racially diverse, 80% diverse if you include women. And we've made significant progress, specifically with women, where we've increased 1% per year, 1 percentage point for the whole organization, and about 8 percentage points women at the VP and above level. So it's been a concerted effort. Joining the CEO Action for Diversity was terrific for us because we learned best practices around days of understanding, where we listen to our employees, where we share our representation metrics across the entire company. That was new for us. And we really powered up our employee resource groups as well. And so when I started as CEO, we only had one employee resource group for women. We now have 8 different employee resource groups representing all types of racial backgrounds. And it's really making the company better. And what's great is our company performance has improved as our diversity has improved. And I always show the charts together and say, I'm not sure which one's causing which. Is our company performance attracting more diversity? Is our being more diverse driving better results? But they're moving in the same direction, which is really exciting.
Well, on that point, then, Marianne, I mean, you're obviously a bit of a trailblazer in your role leading John Hancock. There are a lot of people that would say that when they see someone like you rise to the top, that of course would attract maybe potentially more women to your organization, or at least create a little bit more attention there. How does that sort of feedback loop work, or does it work?
I actually do think it works, and again, thank you for having me here as well. It is amazing sitting at the top that I tend to see a lot more women getting attracted because I think they look up and expect to see role models. And so when they see me, and I'm a mother of 4 kids, my kids are grown up now, but obviously throughout my career, balancing a family and work has always been something that's been an interesting challenge from my perspective. And I think being at the top is an opportunity for women to see what the possibilities are. And I've always been a big proponent saying that you don't have to make a choice between family and work. You can have both and you can make it work and they can live together. And it really has helped. And we've managed to see our gender metrics moving quite substantially over the 3 years that I've been here as well. Again, an opportunity to give women a bigger opportunity within the organization.
There's, I mean, inherent in sort of in the description of diversity and inclusion is that idea that people do want to sort of feel safe to be themselves within their organizations here. We talk a lot about getting people in the door, finding ways to recruit more women, to recruit more ethnic minorities. Once you get those folks in the door, Marianne, how do you sort of make sure that you have an environment there where those people not only want to stay, but really see themselves as able to sort of move up the ladder, so to speak?
Yeah, and I think Kevin talked a little bit about it as well. We also have employee resource groups, and I think that's a real opportunity for people to feel included within the organization and that they can talk through those. We have 8 of them as well, and I think it's great to have them. You know, we have them for Vibe for African American, Asian employees, multicultural, gender, family. So really having a lot of support groups that people can work with. In our ERGs, it's a great opportunity for skills development, an opportunity for open conversations and people to talk about that. And when I signed on with the CEO actions as well, it also gave me a real opportunity to, as Kevin said, look at what other organizations are doing and seeing how we can bring that into our organization. And it really started with our Day of Understanding in February of 2020, right before we all went out as a result of the pandemic. And it just was a wonderful grounding for people. We partnered with YW Boston, and there's lots of opportunities for small organizations to partner with some of the local non-for-profits as well, just to help us in terms of grounding us in some of the history so that people really had a good understanding of that. And then it's about bringing programs into the workplace, having opportunities where people can get into mentorship programs. And that's a lot about what our employee resource groups do as well.
And then, so Tim, then how do you measure success here? Are you just going strictly based on sort of base percentages of how many people from various groups are represented in the company, or is it sort of scaled to maybe look at how many people are more in C-suite positions or in more of an upward trajectory within the companies?
Yeah, so thanks, Romaine. All the above. So one of the things that I'm very proud of is back in August, we issued our first ever Dni Transparency Report. That was 3 years in the making. It took 3 years of planning. We decided on 14 important metrics to our organization and to our stakeholders that we disclose. And our goal was to be the most transparent large organization out there. We started out with over 150 metrics and we landed on 14. For us, it ranges to recruitment, which is hugely important. And Kevin, it's great to hear Stryker's progress. So we've been heavily focused on recruitment, and we can see year in and year out record recruiting classes
Yeah.
across different ethnic groups. We also go all the way to
So,
the top to board representation in my leadership team. For our industry and our profession, one of the things that's unique is we looked at our clients and what type of diversity do we have serving our clients. We're a client service business. So it's a metric that is more applicable in my world and different than Kevin and Marianne's world. So we think it goes to not just top and bottom of what you're recruiting, but also
yeah.
what's really important. And in our world, the clients you serve is a stature and it also is tied to progression in the organization. So we disclose that, we measure it, and we disclose it.
Yeah. So, Kevin, within the organization, I mean, how much should pay and compensation be tied to some of these goals? Your pay, and then pay, of course, of some of the other executives and subordinates within your organization?
Yeah, so we don't have financial metrics, but we do have metrics to hold people accountable. So in our business reviews, we actually review the metrics around diversity. We do an engagement survey every year and we look at inclusion, and we can cut the inclusion data by women, by age group, by race. And so these are metrics that we review very regularly. And our company is a very numbers-driven organization. So if you put all these charts up and you're asked questions about it, believe me, it drives behavior. So while we don't have a specific financial bonus, we do require that every single manager has a DE&I objective. Now, the objective might be increasing diverse slates. The objective might be around recruitment. So they're all different, the types of objectives that we have. They're not quota-based, but they are focused on driving improvement.
Have you found that there's been an added cost, just real quickly, have you found that there's been an added cost to sort of implementing this for the company, Kevin?
No, not at all. In fact, it does take a little longer on recruitment.
Yeah.
And so we've told people, listen, the recruiting is the most important aspect. So if it takes a little longer to get a diverse slate, so be it. And I hold myself accountable on the board. So I don't interview anyone unless I have at least one diverse candidate before I look for a new board person. And it's made a difference in the change on the board. And so I encourage that at all levels of the organization. That's the only area. It might take a little longer in the recruitment funnel, but otherwise it's driving great results and it's improving our company.
Tim, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in. I similar to Kevin, and just in the spirit of sharing best practices, one of the things we learned from one of our clients that we've had in place for 4 years now, in order for a leader to get promoted, they have to have demonstrated what we call a distinctive diversity experience, meaning they have led on the things that Kevin talked about. So we try to inspire people. This is the right thing to do. It's right for our business. So for anybody to get promoted in our organization, they need to have shown they've led in this area. So we're using the carrot and we're measuring it like crazy.
One thing that we hear from a lot of people out there, a lot of executives, and primarily from executives who are at firms that are smaller than the ones that you guys run. Marianne, these are these mid-sized businesses who say, how are we able to sort of do this? I mean, when you have a company with the size and history of PwC or John Hancock or Stryker, people kind of know that the resources are there. But if you're a mid-sized business, what's the selling point? How do you sort of structure it in a way where you can do these things without too much of a cost burden?
Yeah, and I think that, as Kevin said, there's not necessarily a huge cost burden that comes with this. I think that it really is setting out your goals and your metrics. Metrics to me are really important because we always see what gets measured usually gets done. And so I think that the metrics are important. In my personal goals, I have diversity goals, and I do in my management team as well. And I think those are the types of things that you can actually put out there that will actually move the needle. When we're doing hiring, we're saying that we want at least a 40% diverse candidate slate. And if we're working with a recruiting firm, we'll go back to the recruiting firm and say, not good enough. We need to get more diversity on the candidate slate. And so I think a lot of those things don't have to be tied specifically to adding extra dollars. I think it's just holding people accountable and making sure that, as I say, if you're measuring these things, they tend to happen much more readily. And to do that, we had to start with the baseline. So we actually went out in June of this past year and asked everybody to self-identify so that we had a good understanding in terms of what the baseline looks like. Needless to say, there's work for us to do, but now that we know that, we can set targets for ourselves and everybody works together to make sure that we adhere to those targets.
What's been the employee response, though? I mean, anytime these initiatives come out, there's always seems to be a relatively large group of people within those organizations that certainly support it. There also is always going to be a group of people who maybe either question it or maybe even are hostile to it. I mean, how do you sort of address those people?
Yeah, it was interesting. When we did this, there was a number of people that were very nervous about it. We're trying to find out if there was a reason why we were looking for this data. Is it going to be used for something possibly against them? Which really actually surprised me, and maybe I was naive around that. And so I actually had an open forum for anyone who was feeling at all uncomfortable about it, and just be very transparent about what it was that I was trying to accomplish and why this was important information. And just had a Q&A where they could just ask me anything, and it really was a good opportunity for people to get comfort around the reasons why we were doing what we were doing. And that's one thing that I have found, having these open dialogues and these open conversations around all of these topics and issues has really helped us to develop as an organization.
So, Tim, when you were starting CEO Action, I read an interview that you had with the New York Times, and there was an anecdote in there about how an executive, I believe, at your company or someone at your company kind of said, this is going to kind of blow up in your face if you kind of move forward with this. This was sort of in the midst of the George Floyd protests and all of the upheaval that arose out of that. Why did you then decide to keep going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Romaine. So back in 2016, it's a little bit like Kevin. Like for us, we've been on this journey for 5 years now, like making it comfortable to talk about the uncomfortable. And again, I'm a big believer in like being candid. Like race, particularly the topic of race, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And for us, 4 years ago, we decided we needed to talk about it. We needed to be very open about it. And so we had our first day-long discussion of race on July 21st, 2016. We shut the firm down, 55,000 people, shut it down for a day and talked about race. And at the time, that was on the heels of shootings in Minneapolis, Louisiana, and Dallas, and it was raw at the time. And we made the decision we were going to do it because we knew if we wanted to move forward, we needed to break through that uncomfortable moment. And that for us was born the days of understanding. We learned more about each other on that day than we ever had before. And if we hadn't done it, we would have just been stuck, keep hitting the wall over and over again and talking past one another, or afraid to talk about it, or afraid to let our vulnerabilities. We learned that some of our people, when they were outside the office, they didn't feel safe. We learned that people carried their business cards, so if they got pulled over and they were Black, they could show they afforded the car. Had we not had that, we would have never broken through. And if I can, Romaine, just a story, that was in July of
Sure.
2016. And then we continued it. We stayed with it. And it started at the top. It started, it's okay to talk about these. Unfortunately, in September of 2018, one of our own professional staff, a young man by the name of Botham Jean, he was shot and killed in his Dallas apartment by an off-duty Dallas police officer while he was watching Thursday Night Football. That was a tragedy. The silver lining in Bo's killing was the next morning when we woke up, all across the country, our people knew what to do. They didn't need me to give permission. Our people started talking about how they felt. And that told me we were making progress and having the real conversations. Now, to Kevin's point, we're continuing. Like we're now getting rid of, we're constantly having these days of understanding to talk about the hard feelings.
Yeah, I want to squeeze in a couple questions here from the audience before we get too tight on time here. And Kevin, I'll come to you here on this. And we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion from the perspective of race and of gender. This audience member wants to kind of know about when do we sort of start to address it more from socioeconomic backgrounds and social capital and sort of move that into the discussion so we can address maybe issues that aren't necessarily strictly tied to race and gender.
Sure. So one of the things we've done as a company is we've joined the founding group of 110, which is roughly, I think, 40 companies. This was born out of Ken Chenault and Ken Frazier started this initiative, and that's really to bring Black Americans who do not have college degrees and to get them jobs, 1 million jobs over 10 years. So that's really looking at a different socioeconomic pool of people that just don't have access to corporate America. And so we're really excited to join with these other companies and try to bring in people into the workforce that just have been neglected for decades and decades. And so I'm really excited about that. That's kind of a completely different initiative from everything else that we were doing. And that addresses one part of your question on socioeconomics. The other one is healthcare disparities. So within our trade association, we're now looking at how do we increase the representation of ethnic minorities in clinical trials. There are a lot of technologies in medical devices that don't get to Hispanics and don't get to Black Americans. And we're trying to figure out how do we break down those barriers? How do we increase trust in these communities that really are a little bit skeptical of the healthcare system? So those are different types of initiatives that are really trying to address the socioeconomic areas. And frankly, our ERGs in our company are really powered up to be involved in these kinds of initiatives that'll help the community at large. And of course, will help Stryker in addition. But it's a little bit maybe more outside of our normal bullseye, and it's really helping the company. And so those are a couple of examples where we're trying to broaden our net. We have 43,000 employees around the world, but we think we can have a much bigger impact even beyond our own workforce.
So when we talk about the long-term impact here, Marianne, obviously a lot of attention has been paid to this in light of what happened last year and the protests. There's a lot of concern among some folks here that at some point companies will sort of lose interest. They'll move on to whatever the next thing is, and we won't be talking about this as much next year or the year after that. How do you make sure that the programs you're putting in place, the initiatives that you're doing now, are going to be sustainable and, more importantly, have a sustainable benefit?
Well, I really think our employees are going to hold us accountable. And, part of the employee resource groups that we talked about earlier, they're growing in strength and they're growing in numbers in terms of the groups that are being put together. And these are all grassroots organizations that get started up within the company by the employees. And I really do believe that those conversations are changing in terms of the employee resource groups. We're spending a lot more time on the senior management side talking to the leaders of those groups and making sure we understand what some of their concerns are. And I really think that they have changed fundamentally, even in the past year, in terms of what they were doing before versus what they're doing now. And they're becoming an important part of our organization in terms of helping us building skill sets and helping these people grow and for them to feel included within the organization. So I really believe our employees are going to continue to hold us accountable for this. But I also think we're going to have to hold ourselves accountable. And there is a responsibility that I think corporate America has in terms of dealing with a lot of these issues. For many years, we've been very shareholder focused, and now there really is much more of a community requirement that we really are focusing on community and what does it mean for us to help build the community. And similar to what Kevin was saying, we're part of an MLK Scholars Program in Boston, which we're running and funding at about $1.2 million a year, just to be able to help Boston underserved students get summer jobs with not-for-profit organizations. So we're helping 600 students getting jobs every year. We're now into our 14th year, and last year, needless to say, we had to adjust very quickly because of the pandemic to make it all virtual. But it is an opportunity for us to continue to help build the community and make sure that we have skilled people out there and actually help them with financial literacy at the same time. So I think we have a responsibility, and I think community and employees are going to hold us accountable for that on an ongoing basis.
Well, let's talk about the community of CEOs and the community of business leaders here, because it seemed like in the past when we had these sort of pushes for diversity and inclusion, it was really kind of on a company by company basis or organization by organization. It just feels to me, and maybe Tim, you can address this. This feels like it's a little bit more collective this time around in terms of the effort. Is that true?
Yeah, it does. I think your question that you asked us is the right one, which is, are we going to have the same momentum a year from now, 2 years from now? That's absolutely the right question. And frankly, the track record is spotty. The reason I'm more confident today than I've ever been is the scale of the number of CEOs leaning in. I mean, just to give you a sense, since George Floyd's killing, the number of CEOs and CEO action has gone up by 600 since last May. So we went from 1,400 to 2,000. So we're seeing the number of people lean in, and the learning and the collective learnings is more than ever. The willingness to hold accountable, the metrics, the tracking, the transparency, those are all new. The degree and the scale that's new. And I want to comment specifically on transparency. The number of companies who are going more and more transparent. That is one of the reasons we did it. Is I wanted the self-imposed pressure. Like once you're out there, you're not going back. Like and once you're out there with transparency, you're setting that bar on yourselves to get better and better. So I think the number of CEOs who are leaning in on things like days of understanding, like transparency, like more metrics, that is really gives me the confidence that it does feel different this time. Just one other quick point. The number of conversations, I had the privilege of traveling around virtually or physically in the old days, meeting with CEOs. Topic of diversity and inclusion is a top 3 topic when you meet with CEOs, almost regardless of the industry. That's different. And that gives me
Yeah.
hope that we're going to get a lot better.
All right, we only have about a minute left. Kevin, I just want to get a final thought from you here, and specifically on the business case versus the moral case, how you make that argument. Do you make both arguments or do you make one or the other?
Yeah, from the beginning, I've made both arguments. So I've said that the reason we want to be more diverse and inclusive, we want every employee to feel like it's a home game when they go to work. If it feels like it's a home game, you're going to be your best at work. And what I've done is I've juxtaposed the improvement in our metrics around diversity with our business results. And the two really have gone in the same direction. So you need to make both arguments. It is the right thing to do, but it's very good for business.
All right, well, this was a wonderful conversation, a really important topic, and really appreciate all 3 of you sharing your stories with us. Of course, Kevin Lobo, he's the chairman and CEO of Stryker. Of course, Marianne Harrison, president and CEO of John Hancock. And thank you, Tim Ryan, U.S. chair and senior partner over at PwC, also the co-founder of CEO Action for Diversity of Inclusion, of which all 3 folks here on your screen are part of. Really appreciate it.